A pristine blade, and a murder with surgical precision. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. Pop into the comments and let me know where you're joining from today. Hearing from you always makes my day. Let's cut into it. When the doorbell rang at 11:30 that Tuesday morning, I knew one of two things had happened. Either someone was about to interrupt Nero Wolfe's session with his orchids, a capital offense in his book, or Fritz had ordered veal cutlets from the French place on Lexington, and they came early. It wasn't the veal. The bell had that tight, urgent jab that meant whoever was on the other side thought they had a good reason to barge into a sanctum sanctorum. I opened the door, ready to explain in my friendliest do-not-disturb voice that Mr. Wolfe was not accepting drop-ins unless they came with a subpoena or a roast duck. Instead, I got a woman in a houndstooth coat and black gloves, standing with one hand clenched on the handle of a small leather briefcase. She looked like she hadn't slept much and wasn't planning to start now. "I need to speak with Mr. Wolfe," she said. No hesitation. Voice sharp, not loud. "So does half of Manhattan," I said, giving her the once-over. Mid-30s, fine. Posture, eyes like searchlights looking for loose wiring. But he's in conference with approximately 2,200 orchids who've got seniority. Try calling after 4. "I'm not leaving," she said, and for emphasis stepped over the threshold without being invited, which was not only rude, but in this house, borderline suicidal. I shut the door before Fritz could have a cardiac event. "Let's not make this a habit," I said. "People who walk in unannounced either get shown out by me or eaten alive by Wolfe. I won't be long." She glanced around the hallway like she was cataloguing furniture in a museum. "Just tell him. Claudia Darrow is here, he'll remember." The name didn't ring any bells in my belfry, but that didn't mean much. Wolfe's list of people he doesn't want to talk to could fill Carnegie Hall. Still, the woman had a presence. She looked like she might have stared down a room full of board members and walked out with their pensions in her purse. I gave her the arched eyebrow treatment, then phoned upstairs. "He's in the plant room," Fritz whispered when he answered. "But I will tell him." Fritz may be soft-spoken, but he's also Swiss, which means when a stranger invades the brownstone, he takes it personally. 10 minutes later, the greenhouse door opened with the reverence of a tomb unlocking, and Wolfe's voice drifted down the hall like a scolding breeze. "Archie, you may show her in." I turned to Claudia. That was the vocal equivalent of a royal pardon. "You'd better come in before he changes his mind." She followed me into the office, the click of her heels precise as a metronome. Wolfe was already, in his chair naturally, resting all 1/7 of a ton of himself behind the desk, like it was the helm of a destroyer. He didn't look up. Just reached for his glass of beer and sipped like the matter bought him already. "Miss Darrow," he said, "you once sat in that chair and told me you would never return." She sat. "You once told me you only took cases. That interested you." "And yet here we both are," he muttered. I slid into my own chair and opened my notebook, pen ready. I'd bet my lunch she wasn't here to return a library book. Wolfe finally looked at her. "Well." She opened her briefcase, took out a manila envelope and placed it on the desk like it was a live grenade with the pin halfway out. "I need you to find out who's been using my knives," she said. That got even Wolfe's eyebrows to flinch. Mine were already halfway to the ceiling. "Kitchen knives?" I asked. "Designer chef's knives," she said. "Handmade, Japanese steel. I own a restaurant in Brooklyn. Last week one of my chefs sliced his hand open, nearly to the bone, because someone replaced his knife with a replica. Same brand, same model, only dull where it should have been razor sharp." Wolfe frowned. "An industrial prank?" She leaned forward. 2 days ago I found the original knife, hidden behind a vent in the dishwashing station. Clean, too clean, it had been scrubbed, polished, practically sterilized. "Which implies," Wolfe said slowly, "someone used it, then concealed it, and left a copy in plain view." "Yes," she said. Which also implies they didn't want anyone to know what it really cut. I glanced at Wolfe. He had closed his eyes. Was there blood? He asked. Claudia hesitated. Not on the found knife, but yes, in the storeroom, a smear on a box. Not the injured chef's blood. He never left the line. Wolfe grunted. And the police? She shook her head. There's no body, Mr. Wolfe. No theft, no threat. Just a set of very expensive knives being swapped, and one of them too clean. I didn't go to the police because I can't afford the press. One story about sabotage or worse, and we're ruined. The restaurant's on. To Razor's Edge as it is, Wolfe sighed. You're asking me to investigate a phantom crime. I'm asking you to find out what someone wants very badly to hide. There was a long silence. Wolfe's fingers tapped once on the desk. Phooey, he said, which is his version of a maybe. You will leave the envelope. Mr. Goodwin will visit your establishment. He will require access to your staff. Claudia stood, nodded once, and made for the door. Miss Darrow, Wolfe said without looking at her. What do you suspect? She paused. Then, not sabotage, not theft. I think someone cleaned that knife because they didn't want us to see what it cut. Or who? The door closed behind her. Wolfe's eyes were still shut. Well, I said. That was peppy. Want me to cancel the afternoon with Inspector Kramer? No, Wolfe said. Kramer is late. Miss Darrow was early. There is a difference. I opened the envelope. Inside were photos of a commercial kitchen, a blueprint of the restaurant, and a catalogue printout for knives that cost more than my rent. I glanced at Wolfe. You're taking this one? He didn't answer, just picked up his beer again, which in Wolfe speak meant the game was afoot. I had barely finished reading through the rest of the contents in Claudia Darrow's envelope, roster lists, kitchen schedules, annotated menus with knife symbols next to some dishes like they were warning signs, when Wolfe gave his chair a small pushback and reached for the bell pull. That meant Fritz would appear in under 10 seconds, either ready to serve lunch or demand to know why he hadn't been told about the incoming storm we'd just let through the front door. Fritz entered, cloth over his arm, looking somewhere between alarmed and skeptical. Wolfe gestured with his chin. Please call Sol Panzer. Ask if he is available for consultation this evening. Fritz nodded without so much as a word, but the look he gave me said, Who's disturbing the peace this time? The moment the door shut, Wolfe addressed me again without lifting his eyes from the photographs laid neatly before him, like cards in a poker spread. You will go to Miss Darrow's restaurant after lunch. Interview the injured chef. Observe the staff. Verify the placement of the knife when it was found. Collect impressions. Should I wear a tux? I asked. Or is this more of a kitchen boots and rubber gloves kind of visit? He gave me the kind of glance you'd reserve for a waiter who asked whether you wanted ketchup with foie gras. If Miss Darrow is correct, he said slowly, then someone took a blade designed for precision and used it in a manner wholly inappropriate to its purpose. Murder, I said. That is not yet a useful word, he murmured. Begin with misdirection, lead with curiosity, follow only what is concealed. As usual, that cleared it all up. I spent the next half hour prepping, calling the restaurant, to schedule a consultant's visit under a different name, checking the MTA for the least miserable train to Park Slope, and fortifying myself with Fritz's roast chicken sandwich with watercress and mustard, so sharp it could have solved the case by itself. When I arrived at Knox and Bean, the name apparently meant something to someone with a fondness for 19th century British grocers. I was met by a front-of-house man with a haircut that cost more than my shoes. His name was Linus Cray, and he said it like he expected me to be impressed. Tall, narrow, dark blazer, and one of those practiced smiles that belonged to someone who measured social temperature like a bartender measures gin. Mr. Green, he asked. I'd used green for the occasion. That's me. You're here to inspect the safety protocols in the prep kitchen, yes? Per Miss Darrow. That's the excuse, I said pleasantly. But I'm also curious about how you tell your halibut from your hake. He led me past the main dining area, high-ceilinged, dimly lit, with a scattering of couples pretending not to argue, and into the steel and tile belly of the beast. The kitchen was humming, but there was a strange alertness in the air. Conversations dipped when I passed. A few glances lasted just a half-second too long. Suspicion, meet awareness, shake hands, play nice. Cray introduced me to the injured party, Chef Leon Arroyo, who was chopping herbs with his non-dominant hand and looking like a man whose pride had been hit harder than his palm. Bandages were visible under a plastic glove on his right hand, thick enough to qualify as a fashion statement. Slipped during service, he said when I asked about the injury. That's all. Cut bad? I asked. Deep. Right through. The first joint, stitched up, hurts like hell. Which knife? He pointed to a spotless rack mounted above the prep table. 4 glistening blades rested there, like they were waiting to be knighted. That one. The Nakiri. I stepped closer and lifted it. Balanced, light, sharp as a banker's alimony clause. This the one that got switched? Not that exact one. The one I thought was that one. And who found the real one? He hesitated, then nodded toward the dish area. Sous chef, Nadine. She was cleaning back there, said she saw something glinting behind the air vent grate. Pulled it out with tongs. That was the first red flag. If it was just an innocent switch, why hide the original? Anyone else touch? It after. Not that I saw. Darrow took it and locked it up. I jotted that down and thanked him, then made my way to the dish station. The area was half-screened from view, hot and steamy with industrial sinks roaring like Niagara. A woman in her late 20s, strong arms, tired eyes, was loading trays into the sanitizer. She gave me a once-over that could have peeled paint. "You're here about the knife?" she asked, before I said a word. Word travels fast. "It's a kitchen. Nadine, right?" She gave a non-committal grunt. "You found the real knife. Why'd you go poking around an air vent?" She shrugged. Something was off. The replacement didn't feel right, too light. And it had this drag. I thought someone was playing games. Or covering something up. She didn't say anything. "Were you and Leon close?" "No," she said too quickly. "We work." "That's it." I nodded, then walked the perimeter slowly. The air vent in question was low, at shin height, partly hidden behind a steel trolley full of degreasing supplies. If a knife had been stashed there, it was meant to be out of view, not thrown away, but concealed. Someone hadn't panicked. They'd calculated. When I stepped into the back hallway where dry storage and staff lockers were tucked away, I nearly collided with a delivery kid wheeling in a box labeled "Specialty Produce, Handle with Care." He was maybe 20, headphones in, eyes fixed on his phone. "Whoa, hey," I said, catching the cart before it hit my leg. "Watch where you're going." He blinked at me, pulled out one earbud. "Sorry, didn't see you." "Do you usually deliver around lunch?" He shrugged. "Depends, I got 3 more stops after this." "You deliver to Knox and Bean often?" "Couple times a week." I glanced at the box. The label was from a small organic farm upstate. That tracked with the pretentiousness of the place. "Ever go through the back hallway before?" "Yeah." "Sometimes. See anything weird last week? Anybody hanging around who shouldn't be?" Another shrug. "There's always people. Staff's always running around. Sometimes guests come through by mistake." That I filed under, maybe. Guests in a working kitchen would have been noticed, unless they weren't exactly guests. By the time I left the restaurant, I had a page of notes and a growing suspicion that Claudia Darrow had undersold the problem. I'd expected professional jealousy or even a case of culinary one-upmanship. What I found was a staff operating like they'd been briefed by lawyers. Back at the brownstone, I gave Wolfe the report as Fritz served trout amandine. Wolfe chewed slowly, absorbed, eyes half closed like he was tasting my words for acidity. When I finished, he didn't speak for a moment. Then, the knife was not hidden to evade blame. It was hidden because it proved something someone could not afford to have proven. So it was used to hurt someone, I said. No, Wolfe said. It was used to remove something. He reached for a small card and scribbled 3 names, then handed it to me. You will speak to these individuals tomorrow. Do not let them. Know they are suspects. What am I looking for? Not what, he said softly. Whom? A person for whom cleanliness is not next to godliness, but an alibi. I sat back, feeling the weight of it settle. A knife, too clean. A vent, too obscure. And now someone in a kitchen, too controlled. Whatever this was, it wasn't about food, and we'd just whetted our appetite. The next morning, after a breakfast that featured Fritz's eggs en cocotte and Wolfe's third disdainful glance at the newspaper, I headed out with the card Wolfe had given me tucked neatly in my wallet. 3 names written in Wolfe's slanted, methodical hand: Jensen Mars, executive investor Rhea Foreman, former partner, co-founder Dale Corbin, equipment, supplier nothing too spicy on the surface. But I've learned that Wolfe never jots names for sentiment. If they were on the list, it meant they were important to the structure of the thing, like load-bearing beams in a building where the roof's about to cave in. My first stop was Dale Corbin, the equipment supplier. His business, Corbin Culinary Systems, operated out of a squat brick building in Long Island City that looked like it had last been dusted in the late Carter administration. Inside, it smelled like cardboard and motor oil, and the showroom was half-packed with gleaming metal islands, knife racks and high-end espresso machines that looked too clean for their surroundings. Corbin came out from the back, wiping his hands, on a rag. Late 50s, red suspenders, a face like a retired boxer with the attitude of someone who'd once told off a Michelin-starred chef and lived to brag about it. "You're looking into Claudia's mess?" he asked before I could introduce myself. Apparently I was the day's second visitor. "I don't know if it's a mess yet," I said. "I'm just gathering info." He grunted. Knox and Bean spent north of 60 grand on custom knives, ranges, thermal circulators. Hell, even their faucet sensors have sensors. And then she calls me last week asking if I'd delivered a counterfeit. "You mean the swapped knife?" "Yeah, she said it was one of mine. I told her that knife wasn't a fake. It just wasn't hers. I checked my records. That same model, the Nakiri, was sold to another buyer 6 months ago. Different serial." "So 2 identical knives," I said, "but one ended up hidden in a vent." He squinted at me. "Someone wanted to blur the ownership trail. Make it seem like it came from her stock. Any chance someone at your shop is selling off extras?" He didn't take kindly to that, but he didn't throw me out either. "No, but I'll tell you what is odd. Her original order included 12 knives in that line. Now she's saying she has 10. 1 swapped, 1 missing. Means someone either lifted a couple off the line or snuck in later. So there's 1 more knife unaccounted for?" "Far as I know. Unless Claudia's miscounting, which she doesn't do." I left with a copy of the invoice and a bad feeling. This wasn't about a single tool going rogue. There were duplicates, and someone had planned enough to match model numbers. Next, I made my way to the West Village, where Rhea Foreman ran a small food co-op now. Organic, sustainable, all the buzzwords stitched into the awning in gentle earth tones. She met me on the sidewalk after I asked the teenager at the register if Rhea was in. She came out with a linen apron tied around her waist and a subtle wariness in her eyes. "Claudia sent you?" I shrugged. "Not exactly. She came to Mr. Wolfe with a problem. I'm here to trace it." Rhea frowned. She never liked sharing problems. "She said you used to be partners." "We co-founded Knox and Bean. I handled the concept and design." She ran the numbers. What happened? She bought me out 6 months ago, said the direction was changing. I didn't argue. There was a pause. I waited, gave her space. People will fill silence faster than they'll fill out a tax return if you let them. She had investors breathing down her neck, Ria said at last. Wanted to expand, streamline. She thought I was in the way. Is that why you left? It's why I agreed to leave. But the reason I wanted to? Because the kitchen changed. I tilted my head. How so? More tension. Staff turnover doubled. New deliveries started arriving at weird hours. And then the knives. What about the knives? They showed up late. Not her fault, but I started to wonder. You know, how you can walk into a place and sense something's off, like a tune's being played just slightly out of key. She had that tone people get when they're trying not to say something that's still saying it. Did you notice anything go missing? She nodded. A utility knife, not one of the premiums. A paring blade. I chalked it up to poor inventory. Control. I showed her the picture Claudia had provided of the knife found in the vent. That's one of the premium ones. They weren't supposed to be used for anything but line work. But if someone had a reason, they could sneak one out, I finished. Use it off book, then plant a match. Ria didn't confirm, but she didn't deny it either. Talk to Jensen Mars, she said as I left. He likes control, but he doesn't like mess. This is the kind of thing he'd want buried before it becomes expensive. Mars was my last stop. His office sat in a glass tower in Midtown, perched on the 20th floor with a view of money going in and out of things I couldn't afford to name. He welcomed me in with a handshake, like a cold steel rod, and a smile built for quarterly reports. Claudia's. Hired Wolfe? He said after I explained my role. That means she thinks this is serious or wants someone else to think so. You funded the restaurant? I asked. Primary investor, he said, lounging back into a leather chair. I put up the capital. She runs the operations. You've stayed involved? I keep tabs. I sit on the board. It's a high-end concept. It needs protecting. I leaned forward. Would sabotage fall under needs protecting? He didn't blink. There's no sabotage. Claudia's dramatic. She panics when things get dirty. But she's right about one thing. Someone tampered with equipment. That's not panic, that's exposure. If something happened, he said evenly, then it needs to be handled quietly. I don't invest in headlines. If you or Wolfe find something actionable, let me know. I have lawyers for the rest. Any recent disputes among the staff? Or deliveries? Anyone leave under unusual circumstances? He exhaled. Ask her about Brett, the previous floor manager. He left. Fast and not by choice. She'll tell you it was about inventory shrinkage, but I think it was personal. How personal? Mars allowed a smile to curl, like he knew something I hadn't earned. She's too proud to admit it. But when people get too close, they start cutting corners. And sometimes they cut more than that. When I returned to the brownstone, Wolfe was in his chair, eyes closed, fingers steepled. He didn't open them as I sat down and gave my report. Only at the mention of the unaccounted knife did he twitch. There are now 3 knives, he said softly. The replica, the one hidden, and the one missing. A trinity of misdirection. And a fired employee with a motive, I added. Brett, Wolfe repeated. Yes, find him. He opened his eyes then, sharp and focused. Mr. Goodwin, I guess, have not yet seen the wound, he said. The hand injury. I saw the bandage. No, the wound, its depth, its direction. It may tell us more than the blade that made it. I nodded. And Saul? Wolfe gave a satisfied grunt. He is speaking to Miss Darrow now. Let us hope she is as precise as her knives. I didn't know yet who had used what on whom, or why, but we had sharp edges pointing everywhere, and one of them was bound to slice through the truth. And when it did, Wolfe would be ready. Knife, fork, and judgment. The next morning began with Saul Panza's report arriving by envelope. Not email, not phone, not even hand-delivered with one of his usual sarcastic remarks. Just an envelope slipped under the door like it was 1947, and we were being shadowed by the FBI. Wolfe examined the contents while I poured coffee. As usual, Fritz had produced a breakfast too good for the mood. Rye toast, poached pears, and a delicate curl of ham that probably cost more than Claudia Darrow's monthly utilities. Wolfe, however, barely touched it. When he finally spoke, it was with the sort of slow, weighted tone that meant the pieces had started to stick together. Mr. Panzer reports Miss Darrow made payments to a private account under the name of Brett. Naylor over the past 4 months in cash weekly. I blinked. Blackmail? Possibly, but not successful. The payment stopped 3 weeks ago. That tracks, I said. That's right around when the knife got swapped. Wolfe didn't respond. He reached again for Saul's sheet, then passed it across the desk to me. There were notes, mostly times and places. Amounts a blurry photo clipped from security footage. Brett Naylor, mid-30s, pale, angular, carrying a red courier bag and entering a basement door beneath a jazz club in Williamsburg. Saul followed him for 2 days, Wolfe murmured. The man does not live anywhere with an official lease. He uses rotating sublets and receives no traceable salary, but he meets regularly with one person. I scanned further down the report. The name was familiar. Nadine, I said aloud. The sous chef who found the knife. Wolfe nodded, barely. You'll visit them, together or separately, as you see fit. Start with Miss Darrow. I want her story again, this time without the clean version. Claudia Darrow wasn't in the restaurant when I arrived. She was in the narrow office upstairs, which looked like it had once been a pantry and still hadn't gotten over it. I knocked once and stepped inside. She looked tired. The last time we'd spoken, her makeup had been exact, her posture stiff. Now her eyes were shadowed, and her tone had lost its edge. If this is about Brett, she said before I sat down, I already told Wolfe what I know. No, you told him what was safe, I said. Now, tell me the rest. She stared at me for a second, then leaned back in her chair with a long, resigned breath. We were involved. Briefly. It was a mistake. He worked front of house and I thought he was harmless, charming, thoughtful. Then the payments started. What was he threatening you with? She swallowed. He claimed to have access to guest records, private details, celebrity visits, dietary logs. Said he'd leak them to the press, spin it like we were negligent or selling data. Were you? Of course not. But the threat was plausible enough, and damaging enough. So you paid. For a while. Then I told him. I was done. I changed all staff access codes, purged old files, replaced the entire POS system. And then the knife turned up. Yes. I studied her face. She wasn't lying, but she wasn't telling everything either. Did you know he was still in touch with Nadine? She blinked. No, she said. I didn't. Well, he is. Regular meetings, mostly late at night. Cash exchanges. Her expression flickered. Not anger. Something worse. A realization. I promoted Nadine after Brett left. She said she hated him, said he made passes. I thought... You thought you could trust her? She nodded. I stood. One more thing, I said. Leon Arroyo's hand, that cut, was it? Seen by a doctor. Yes. At a clinic in Fort Greene. Why? I need to see the report. Her face tightened. You think he faked it? I think someone did, I said. And I'd like to know whether it happened in a kitchen or in a room with no witnesses. I got the report through Wolfe's doctor, who made the call and got the clinic's version faxed over in under an hour. It confirmed what I suspected. The cut didn't match the story. According to the attending physician, the wound was clean. But it had entered at a reverse angle. Not from chopping or dicing, but as if Leon had grasped something and pulled it toward him. Defensive wound, not culinary. And the bleeding had already been partially clotted by the time he walked in, meaning it had happened earlier than claimed. I left a message with Wolfe, then turned my attention to Nadine, Finding her wasn't hard. I knew her shift ended at 4, and I had Saul's log of her usual path home. A 7-block walk to a shared apartment above a dry cleaner near Prospect Park. I waited until she'd turned the corner and fell in step beside her like we were old friends. "I hear you and Brett have history," I said casually. She jumped, startled. "What? How?" "Let's not do the dance, Nadine. You know who I am. I'm here to help Wolfe sort out a kitchen full of sharp tools and dull lies." She tried to turn left. I blocked her with my elbow gently. "He's been using you," I said, "or you've been helping him. I don't much care which. But I do care that a knife ended up behind a vent the same week someone tried to disappear something that cut too clean." Her mouth tightened. "He told me it wasn't a crime," she said at last. "Then why hide it? He said Leon was hurting him, pressuring him, that he had to fight back. Leon's not small." "I know," she said. "But he said he had proof, that Leon had done it to others. Brett got the knife from the rack and told Leon to meet him in the supply closet. Said he just wanted to scare him. There was shouting. Then Leon came out bleeding." "And Brett disappeared?" She nodded. I stared at her. "Why not go to the police?" "Because she would have fired me, Claudia. She hates scandal. I thought I could keep it quiet. Find the knife, control the story. By hiding evidence, I didn't know what else to do." "You hid a bloodless knife," I said, "which means someone cleaned it before you found it." She flinched. "I found it clean. I didn't clean it, I swear." That I believed. I let her go after that, but only after confirming Brett's last known haunt, a bar in Gowanus, frequented by line cooks and the kinds of bartenders who never call you by name. When I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe had assembled the pieces. He listened, eyes closed, as I laid out what I'd learned. When I finished, he opened them. "We now have," he said, "a false wound, a real threat, and a woman with a moral compass misaligned by fear." "Do we call the police?" I asked. "No," Wolfe said. "Not yet. Tomorrow evening we shall invite all parties to the office. You will ensure Mr. Naylor attends." "And if he doesn't want to?" Wolfe allowed the barest hint of a smile. "Then tell him Miss Darrow is filing charges. Or better, tell him she's not. Let him wonder why." I nodded. "And Wolfe?" I added. "Yes? Who do you think the knife really hurt?" He closed his eyes again, steepling his fingers. "Ah, Mr. Goodwin, that is precisely the question I intend to answer." By the time Thursday evening rolled around, the brownstone was no longer a sanctuary of silence and order. Fritz was scandalized. He always is when we entertain more than one person in the office, and especially when any of them have kitchen or knife in their recent resume. He made it clear, without saying a word, that if any suspect so much as brushed a chair leg with grease, someone would be scrubbing hardwood with a toothbrush by midnight. But Wolfe had declared an assembly. That meant the chairs had been arranged, the globe decanter had been moved out of reach, and Wolfe's orchid room had been sealed off like a pharaoh's tomb. No distractions, no interruptions, and no mercy. By 7 o'clock the room held 6 people, 5 seated, 1 standing. Claudia Darrow perched on the edge of her chair like it might snap if she let her full weight settle. Rhea Foreman, the former partner, was calm, composed, the only one who hadn't dressed for battle. Jensen Mars, investor Deluxe, leaned back, with his arms crossed like he owned the patent on impatience. Leon Arroyo sat rigidly, bandaged hand in lap, eyes darting every few seconds. Nadine, the sous chef, avoided everyone's gaze. And last, standing by the bookshelf with a jittery energy that made me want to check the walls for escape holes, was Brett Naylor. He hadn't wanted to come. But after I'd tracked him down in a back-alley bar and mentioned Claudia wasn't pressing charges yet, his curiosity apparently got the better of him. Or maybe it was ego. He'd shaved, thrown on a blazer, and still managed to look like someone who had answers to give but would rather be paid for them. Wolfe, of course, remained behind his desk, motionless, a mountain of deduction dressed in brown and gold. He regarded the room like a chessboard that was finally ready for play. "I thank you for coming," he said, voice smooth but stripped of ceremony. "You are here because an object has disrupted the logical order of things. Not a bomb, not a gun, a knife." He let that hang in the air, like a cleaver before the drop. "Specifically," he continued, "a high-end Nakiri-style chef's knife, manufactured by Sugimoto, purchased by Miss Darrow's establishment in a set of 12. Of these, one was reportedly involved in an accidental injury. Another was found hidden behind an air vent, and a third remains missing." That got a reaction. Nadine shifted in her seat. Mars narrowed his eyes. Claudia looked down. "Mr. Naylor," Wolfe said abruptly, "you left your position under a cloud of suspicion," Brett scoffed. "I was let go for reasons I dispute." "Because you attempted to extort Miss Darrow," Wolfe said evenly. That froze the room. "I didn't." "You accepted cash repeatedly for silence. Whether you extorted her or she paid out of guilt is beside the point. The result was secrecy." Brett looked at Claudia. "You told him?" "She didn't have to," Wolfe said. "Mr. Panzer is competent." Jensen Mars leaned forward. "This isn't the issue at hand, is it? Blackmail is distasteful, but it's not a crime if there's no complaint." Wolfe waved that away. "No, Mr. Mars, it is not the heart of the matter. The heart is why a knife was hidden, and more precisely, what it was used for." He let that pause stretch. "Miss Darrow," he said, "your claim was that the knife found behind the vent had been cleaned. Unusually so. Was it?" "Yes. No fingerprints, no grease, no protein remnants?" "None," she confirmed. "Sterilized." "That," Wolfe said, "is impossible. A commercial kitchen, no matter how thorough, is not a surgical theater. Even professional sanitization leaves traces." Brett shifted his weight. Wolfe turned to him. "You cleaned the knife, Mr. Naylor. You had to. You used gloves, bleach, possibly alcohol. But the point wasn't to clean. It was to eliminate." Brett's mouth opened, closed. "I don't know what—" "You do," Wolfe interrupted, a slight rise in volume. "The knife was used for something you did not want associated with you. Not a cut of beef, not a vegetable. It made a mark on a person." Leon straightened. Nadine exhaled sharply. "I think," Wolfe went on, "you had a confrontation with Mr. Arroyo, possibly regarding his behavior. You lured him somewhere private, under the pretense of settling things. You had the knife, you made a threat, but something went wrong." Leon's eyes narrowed. "He attacked me." Wolfe nodded once. "Yes. I believe he did, but not first, and not with intent. You nicked him on purpose. A control tactic, a demonstration. You wanted to scare him. Instead, he panicked. The wound was real, but the story was false. He claimed it happened in the kitchen during prep to conceal what had occurred." Nadine's voice broke the silence. "He said if anyone found out, they'd be fired, that he'd tell them I was in on it." Wolfe turned to her gently. "You found the knife." "I didn't clean it," she said quickly. I just didn't want anyone to see it." "Why?" I asked. "Because it wasn't a kitchen accident," she said. It was rage. I saw the look in Brett's eyes. He didn't want to hurt Leon, not really. He wanted to show he could, that he could hurt anyone. Brett snorted. "You're both reaching." "Mr. Naylor," Wolfe said, his voice now sharp, "as the knife in question, if you insist on maintaining innocence, I will be forced to contact the police. They will find the third knife eventually. They will also find the bank records, the communications with Miss Foreman, and the security footage from Knox and Bean's cellar entrance. That last part was a bluff, and a good one. There was no footage, but Brett didn't know that. He hesitated. "What do you want from me?" he said finally. "Nothing," Wolfe said simply. "You will not be charged, but you will leave the city. Immediately. If you do not, I shall send Mr. Goodwin with a transcript of this discussion to the precinct." Brett looked at Claudia. "I never meant to—" "Get out," she said, and he did. The room exhaled collectively once he was gone. Mars stood. "This changes nothing about the investment agreement." "Of course not," Wolfe said. "But I suggest you evaluate your oversight protocols." Mars departed without another word. Rhea left shortly after, pausing to place a hand on Claudia's shoulder, a small, genuine gesture. Nadine lingered, then spoke to Wolfe directly. "Thank you for not shaming me." He inclined his head. "You acted from fear. Next time, choose differently." She left, and then there were three, Wolfe, Claudia, and me. She looked at Wolfe. "So that's it?" "No," he said. "There is still the matter of the missing knife. I suspect it was discarded the night Leon was injured, possibly down a drain or into one of your produce shipments. But it no longer matters," she nodded. "What does matter?" Wolfe finally leaned back. "That you rehire carefully, that you trust wisely, and that you never confuse cleanliness with order. The former can be manufactured, the latter must be earned." She left without another word, leaving behind a silence that was almost pleasant. Fritz appeared with beer for Wolfe and tea for me. Wolfe took a sip, then looked at me. "I dislike knives," he said. "That so? They are tools of precision, yes, but also of escalation. One never reaches for a knife unless they have first surrendered to the idea of control through force." I raised my cup. "And yet force rarely solves your cases." He closed his eyes. "Precisely, Archie. That is why I let you carry the gun." And with that the brownstone settled once more. The air cooled. The silence returned. Only the edge of the truth remained, sliced, clean, and final. The following morning, peace reigned at the brownstone, or at least as much peace as one can expect after hosting a verbal inquisition involving knives, blackmail, and a chef with a bandaged ego. Fritz served breakfast like a man trying to restore natural order. Soft-boiled eggs, toasted English muffins, and grapefruit segments so meticulously sectioned they'd make a surgeon weep. Wolfe, back in full vegetative state beneath the high-backed chair, consumed slowly, and read the Gazette as though the events of the past week were trivial rumors whispered in a distant kingdom. You'd think he hadn't cracked a blackmail ring, exposed an attempted assault, and nearly driven a sociopath out of town with nothing more than his voice and a chair. But I knew better. He was ruminating. His mind doesn't idle like a normal person's. It simmers until the next unsolved complication bubbles up, and today something still gnawed at him. "Mr. Goodwin," he said at length, folding his napkin and setting down his fork with unusual care, "I remain dissatisfied. With breakfast? Phooey. With the facts." He pushed his plate away. "We have identified the wound as deliberate, the act as personal, and the concealment as reactive. But one question remains unanswered." "Which one?" I asked. He looked at me, his gaze heavy with emphasis. "The third knife." I hesitated. "You said it was likely disposed of, washed down a drain or hidden in a produce shipment." "That was a tolerable explanation," Wolfe admitted, "but not a satisfying one." I raised a brow. "So we're reopening the case?" "No, we are re-evaluating its perimeter. Translation, I was being sent out again." "Do you believe someone still has the third knife?" I asked. Wolfe didn't respond directly. He turned to his notebook where he had drawn a triangle, one point labeled replica, another vent, and the third blank. "The replica was introduced," he said, tapping the first point, "to disguise the absence of the original. The knife in the vent served to conceal the act, yet could not be destroyed without arousing suspicion. The third, It served no purpose unless retained. I frowned. You think someone kept it? Wolfe nodded. Which suggests it had further use. Or sentimental value, both of which are concerning. I ran a mental inventory of the players. Brett was gone, slinking south if Saul's morning bulletin was correct. Claudia was stable, rear detached, Mars in damage control mode, and Nadine was still a question mark. She'd told her piece, true. But what she hadn't said might matter more than what she had. I'll go talk to her, I said. Wolfe waved his hand. Do. I called ahead, said I was dropping by to tie up loose ends. She didn't sound thrilled, but she agreed to meet. Me at a corner cafe in Prospect Heights, neutral territory with low chances of being interrupted by an angry chef or nosy investor. She was already there when I arrived. No apron today. Street clothes, an oversized hoodie, jeans and a baseball cap that made her look like she was hiding from the press. I thought this was done, she said before I sat. It is, I said. Almost. We ordered coffee. I waited until the first sip was down before sliding into it. There's still one knife missing. She didn't flinch, but her grip on the mug tightened. Brett told me he lost it. She said, panicked and dropped it somewhere. You believed that? I wanted to. I leaned in slightly. You know where it is, Nadine. I think you've known since the day after Leon's injury. You just didn't tell us because the truth would raise questions about you. Her eyes didn't leave mine. There was defiance, but also fear. Tell me, I said softly. She looked, down at her hands, took a breath. The night after the fight, I went back to the kitchen after hours. I wanted to see if the knife was still in play. I had a key. I didn't tell Claudia. And I found a second blade in the back storeroom, not in the dish pit. Not where the others were stored. It was wrapped in parchment and hidden inside a delivery box, still damp but clean. No prints, no blood. I recognized it instantly. And you didn't tell anyone? She shook her head. I kept it, she said. I told myself I might need it. If Brett turned violent again, or if he tried to lie his way back in, it was leverage. Where is it now? At home, she said. In my freezer, sealed in plastic beneath the frozen peas. I blinked. Freezer? She gave a bitter smile. Cold slows corrosion, keeps it preserved. That sounded less like fear and more like planning. You were going to use it against him. Only if I had to, I exhaled, sat back. You're lucky Wolfe isn't the police. I know. We parted with the understanding that she'd bring the knife to the brownstone that evening. I didn't press for more. There was something about her, a controlled desperation, that told me she wasn't done with guilt, not by a long shot. By the time I returned, Wolfe had already prepared. A sealed box for the knife's arrival. No fingerprints, no smudges. Just a thick, cotton-lined interior and a note ready for the authorities, should they eventually become involved. You were right, I said. She kept it. For protection. Wolfe grunted. Misdirected loyalty is no substitute for wisdom. He looked at the empty triangle on the page and filled in the final label. Insurance. I nodded. So now what? Now, Wolfe said, we permit Miss Darrow to resume her culinary pursuits, and we allow Miss Nadine to re-examine her understanding of justice. He poured himself a beer. I raised an eyebrow. That's a rare touch of mercy. It is not mercy, Mr. Goodwin. It is restraint. If every moral failing required prosecution, we would have no staff, no clients, and no food. He lifted his glass, and I matched it with my cup of lukewarm coffee. To knives, I said dryly. No, Wolfe said. To the hands that hold them, and to the minds that keep them sheathed. Amen to that. We sat in silence as the light filtered in from the window, cutting across the carpet in a perfect, unbroken line, sharp as the truth and this time just as clean. The knife arrived that evening in a plain paper bag, carried with all the reverence of a hostage handoff. Nadine rang the bell precisely at 8, as instructed. Fritz answered the door with the air of a man who'd been asked to host a dinner party for pickpockets. He let her in, said nothing, and disappeared to the kitchen with the rigid grace of someone preserving the sanctity of his domain one step at a time. I met Nadine in the front hall. She looked even more exhausted than she had the day before, which was saying something. She handed me the bag without comment. "Is it still cold?" I asked. "Wrapped in 3 freezer packs," she said. "Haven't touched it since this morning." I peeked inside. The clear plastic was fogged with condensation, but the silhouette of the knife was unmistakable. Long, flat-edged, beautifully forged, and unnervingly still. "Wolfe's in the office," I said. "Come on." She followed me in, clutching her elbows as if they might slip away otherwise. Wolfe, already seated and watching the doorway like he was expecting a criminal rather than a sous chef, didn't acknowledge us right away. He was gazing at his desk blotter, fingers steepled, breath even. When Nadine took the seat opposite, he finally spoke. "Miss Beale, you have brought the object?" I placed it gently on the edge of his desk. She nodded. "I didn't know what else to do with." "Teos, you did not think to destroy it?" "No, I couldn't. I didn't want it used again, but I couldn't get rid of it. So I thought—" She paused, visibly struggling. "I thought if things went bad again, I could show it to Claudia, or the police." "And what story would you have told them?" Wolfe asked. "That you discovered it tucked behind a sack of onions, or that it was a forgotten tool from a forgotten prep session." Her jaw tightened. "I don't know." He leaned slightly forward. "Then allow me to assist. You retrieved this knife after Mr. Naylor fled the restaurant. You suspected, correctly, that it was the missing third piece in a sequence. One knife to injure, one to replace, and this one, this final one, to retain. A token. Not just of protection, but of knowledge. You wished to keep control." She didn't answer, but the silence was confirmation enough. Wolfe opened a drawer and removed a cotton-lined wooden box. He gestured, and I unwrapped the plastic and placed the knife inside. He closed the lid with a soft but definitive click, then slid the box away from the edge of the desk, as if shielding himself from it. "You will not speak of this to anyone else," Wolfe said. "Unless formally compelled. Is that understood?" "Yes," Nadine said. "You are free to return to your work. But do so with the understanding that your judgment, though defensible, was flawed." She stood. "I know." He didn't dismiss her. She dismissed herself, and I escorted her out without saying anything else. Sometimes guilt doesn't need a chaperone. It finds its way home on its own. Back in the office, Wolfe was gazing at the sealed box like it was a caged animal. "She could have buried it," I said. "Tossed it into the river, but she kept it," Wolfe grunted, "because it represented power. Knowledge withheld is a form of strength, especially to those who feel otherwise powerless." "You think she'll use it?" "No," he said. "The impulse has passed. The moment the weapon was surrendered, so was its leverage." I sat. "We're done then." "With the knife, yes, but not with what it reveals." I waited, letting the pause form. "Miss Beale," he continued, "acted not out of cruelty but survival. So did Mr. Naylor. The distinction lies in their capacity for reflection. One regretted, the other justified." "And Leon?" Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Ah," he said. "Yes. Mr. Arroyo." He opened his notebook and slid it toward me. A single line was written. Leon knew the knife wasn't his. I frowned. "Okay, my butt. Leon claimed he used the replacement blade to slice mushrooms during prep," Wolfe said. "But the model swapped, while visually identical, is lighter, thinner, and favored for vegetables with a crisp break. Mushrooms are best handled with a utility or chef's knife. Any competent cook would have noticed the difference." "You're saying he knew it wasn't his and used it anyway?" Wolfe shook his head. No, he pretended to. He claimed he used it. But in truth, I believe he never touched the replica. Why would he lie? Wolfe tapped the blotter. Because he didn't want questions about why his knife was missing. If the original was used against him or near him and then vanished, his story had to be controlled. Better to say I used a faulty knife and was injured, than to admit, I never saw my knife again after a colleague attacked me. So you think he helped cover it up? Wolfe gave me a look like I'd asked if he watered orchids. With soda. Mr. Goodwin, he fabricated the event. That is a cover-up. But why not tell Claudia? Shame, power, fear. Perhaps he wished to avoid litigation or the embarrassment of being wounded in a non-kitchen altercation. Or perhaps... He paused. He intended to use the incident for leverage. I blinked. You think Leon was blackmailing her? I think he hoped to, but Brett got there first. I let that sink in. The whole place was a pressure cooker, I said. Everyone trying to keep the lid on. Yes, Wolfe agreed. And all it took was one knife to rattle the seal. The rest of the evening passed quietly. Wolfe dictated a short letter to Claudia Darrow, summarizing the brownstone's role and offering a final observation that I was certain would double as a philosophical slap. He ended it with, "The sharpest blade is not the one that cuts, but the one that compels silence," which, coming from him, was practically a lullaby. At precisely 10 o'clock, Wolfe rang for beer and a cheese board. Fritz brought it in, muttering only once about disinfecting the office thoroughly tomorrow. Wolfe ignored him. I poured beer. Wolfe sipped and leaned back. You're still thinking about it, I said. Always. Think Brett will come back? No, Wolfe said flatly. He was not brave, only desperate. And desperation flees when its avenues are closed. And Nadine? She will remain cautious and, I suspect, loyal to a fault. But she has seen the edge of the blade, so to speak. She will tread carefully. I lifted a wedge of cheese with a cracker and paused. So, to sum it up, Leon lied. To protect his pride. Nadine lied to protect her job. Claudia paid to protect her reputation. And Brett lied because he thought truth was something only weaker people used. Wolfe nodded approvingly. Excellent, Mr. Goodwin. You may yet earn your next raise. That'll be the day, I said, grinning. He closed his eyes. Pfui. The brownstone returned to its usual state, quiet, methodical, and filled with the aroma of aged cheese and smug vindication. The knife was boxed, the danger removed, and the final truth, if not comforting, at least understood. In Wolfe's world, that was the closest thing to justice, and in mine, it meant the case was over, almost. The next morning came with a surprise, and in our line of work, surprises are like mustard on crème brûlée, rare, unwelcome, and impossible to ignore. It arrived in the form of a small envelope, hand-delivered by a courier who smelled faintly of cinnamon and suspicion. I intercepted it before Fritz could raise an alarm and brought it into the office, where Wolfe sat with a volume of Horace in one hand and a cup of chicory coffee in the other. He looked up with one raised brow when I entered without knocking. You've got mail, I said, holding up the envelope. Burn it, he replied without lowering the book. It's from Claudia Darrow. He closed the book. Proceed. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single folded sheet of thick stationery, handwritten in a slanted, graceful hand. Mr. Wolfe, the matter is now resolved, and I am grateful for your intervention. The restaurant is running again, quieter, leaner. We have replaced both Arroyo and veal. Mars is breathing down my neck less often. Ria has offered to help me with a new concept, one that perhaps puts ethics back on the menu. I have not spoken to the police, nor do I plan to. I do not expect you to approve, but I will offer this. Sometimes a blade must be buried, not brandished. And silence, as you've reminded me, is its own form of control. "Thank you, Claudia." Nero Wolfe took the note, read it twice, then handed it back with a grunt. Not the dismissive kind. This one was heavier, like a baker checking the bottom of a loaf and finding it slightly underdone. "Replace both?" I said. "Leon and Nadine?" "She has removed the wound and its witness," Wolfe murmured. "A surgical act." "Cold," I said. "Even for her." "Pragmatic," Wolfe corrected. "She is reasserting control, rebranding without noise. A clean break. Ironic, considering the cut that started all this wasn't clean at all." Wolfe steepled his fingers. "The blade was, Mr. Goodwin. It was the hands that used it who lacked precision." I poured us both fresh coffee. He didn't protest. "So where does that leave us?" I asked. "Here," Wolfe said. "Exactly where we were. The brownstone intact, the fee delivered, the world outside marginally less chaotic than before." "And the knife?" He gestured toward the safe, locked behind the globe. "The sealed box sat in its steel belly, wrapped in cloth and consequence. I intend to deliver it to the authorities anonymously," he said, "should it be needed in future inquiries." "No return address?" "Of course not. They'll know where it came from." We lapsed into a silence that might have been mistaken for satisfaction by anyone who didn't know us better, but I could feel something lingering behind Wolfe's impassivity. Not guilt, certainly, not in his wheelhouse, but maybe a flicker of disquiet. "You think we got it wrong?" I asked. "No," he said, "but I think we were late." "Too late for what?" He stared at the fire grate, unlit this time, "For prevention," he said quietly. "Had Miss Darrow come to us sooner, had Mr. Naylor been dismissed earlier, had Miss Beale trusted someone before she hid a weapon, we might have spared them the corrosion of fear." I finished my coffee. "Yeah, well, if people told the truth on time, we'd be out of work." Wolfe didn't argue. Later that day, Saul dropped by, as if summoned by instinct. He didn't even sit, just stood in the office doorway and nodded, like a man confirming weather reports. "He's in New Mexico," he said, "under a different name, working in a brewery, pays cash." "Mr. Naylor?" Wolfe asked. Saul nodded. "He's not coming back." "And the knife?" Saul glanced at the safe. "Nobody's looking for it, not yet." Wolfe thanked him without flair, and Saul left as silently as he arrived. That evening I stepped into the kitchen for a breath and found Fritz plating an herbed duck breast with such concentration that I didn't dare interrupt him until the sauce hit the edge of the plate. "You really think she's better off now?" I asked, not specifying who. Fritz, to his credit, didn't pretend to misunderstand. "She removed the infection," he said, "but healing takes longer than cutting." He returned to the stove, and I wandered back to the office where Wolfe was leafing through his plant journal, presumably cataloguing the bloom cycle of something Latin and unforgiving. "You're brooding," I said, sitting. "I never brood." Reflect then, like a pond, with ripples." He gave me the briefest look of disdain. "You're insufferable." "Also right." We sat for another minute before Wolfe closed the journal and looked directly at me. "I once said that knives are tools of escalation," he said, "but I was wrong. They are tools of expression. When words fail, when power slips, when fear reigns, a knife emerges. And this time, the knife did not kill, but it spoke." He reached for his beer, took a contemplative sip and let out a long, quiet breath. "Next week," he said, "we return to the usual. No more chefs, no more blades. You mean to tell me you're turning down that case with the poisoned truffle shipment?" His eye twitched. "You made that up," he said flatly. "Sure did." He closed his eyes. "Pfui." And with that, the case of the knife that sliced too clean was shelved. No headlines, no handcuffs. Just a sealed box, a few scarred reputations, and a lesson sharpened against human folly, that in the right hands a knife can prepare a meal or hide a motive. And the difference, as always, depends on the hand that holds it. Back in my room I filed the report, typed up my notes, and considered how strange it was that the sharpest story I'd heard all year had ended not with a scream, but with silence. Clean slice, no blood, just truth. A week later, the brownstone had returned to its preferred state of predictability: meals at precise intervals, silence in the halls, and orchids fussed over with the reverence of medieval saints. Wolfe had resumed his plant journal with the same vigor he once reserved for dismantling alibis. I, for my part, had taken up reorganizing the case files in the downstairs cabinet, a task I attempted about twice a year before remembering why. I hated it. The case of the knife that sliced too clean was filed under Resolved Client Confidential, just above the marmalade mix-up and below the venison vindication, both of which, believe it or not, involved crimes. I labeled the manila folder, slid it in, and closed the drawer on a chapter that had unfolded sharp, tense, and surprisingly bloodless, at least in the medical sense. I was halfway through coffee and a crossword when the phone rang. Wolfe gestured for me to answer without glancing up from the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. "Archie Goodwin," I said. "Mr. Goodwin." It was Claudia Darrow's voice, steady but low, like someone speaking into a mirror to see how serious they sounded. "I trust you're calling to say business is booming and you've taken up meditation." There was a pause. "No, I'm calling because someone left a knife on my doorstep this morning." I sat up straighter. "Describe it." "Wrapped in brown butcher paper. No note, no blood. But it's the same model, same make. It's not one of mine." "I've checked. All accounted for. Where's the knife now?" "Still in the paper. I haven't unwrapped it. I thought maybe you'd want to." I covered the receiver. "Wolfe," he grunted. "Someone left a knife on Claudia's doorstep." Another grunt, darker this time. "Go." I was already reaching for my coat. Claudia's brownstone in Park Slope was a far cry from Wolfe's, sleeker, colder, full of modern lines and angular furniture that begged you not to sit too long. She met me at the door without a word and led me to the kitchen island, where the package sat like a guest no one wanted to claim. I examined the paper. The wrap was clean but creased at the edges, no markings, taped once across the middle. I peeled it open slowly. Inside, nestled in Sa's nest of white cloth, was a knife, Nakari style, Sugimoto make, same weight and cut as the others, but this one had an engraving on the spine. 3 letters, scratched faintly, like someone had etched them with a pin, L.A. Leon Arroyo. I looked up. Claudia was watching me with arms folded. "I told you he was gone," she said. "After the meeting, I fired him. He didn't contest it. He just left. You hear from him since?" "No, this is the first." I wrapped the knife back up. "You said you checked your knives." "We keep a log. This one's not from the restaurant. We've only ever ordered 12 of that model. 2 were compromised, 10 remain. This isn't one of them." "So he kept one," I said, "or had a duplicate, or it's a message." That part we both understood without saying. I brought the package with me when I left, walked it the 12 blocks to the train with the kind of care usually reserved for organs in transit. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe received the wrapped bundle as if it were a telegram from an enemy. "King." He inspected the initials with a magnifying lens, grunted, and set it on the desk as though it had declared itself inert. "For now." "This is not the missing blade," he said after a moment. "You're sure?" "Yes." Miss Beale's knife had a manufacturing mark on the hilt, a slight chip in the metalwork. "This one is unmarred." Mr. Panzer confirmed the detail in his notes. "So this makes 13. Wolfe leaned back, heavy and deliberate. "A secret order. Concealed at the time of the others." "To what end?" I asked. He closed his eyes. "Consider the timeline, Mr. Goodwin. The set was ordered. 1 was hidden, 1 replaced, 1 retained, and now 1 appears, outside all the narratives, after the fact. After silence. A souvenir? Wolfe shook his head. A confession. The word sat there for a beat too long. Leon? Who else? Wolfe murmured. He bore the wound, told the lie, maintained the cover, but perhaps he carried guilt as poorly as he carried pride. I crossed my arms. So he kept a knife, quietly, as proof or punishment. And now he has returned it, Wolfe said, not to the authorities, to Miss Darrow. A private apology? Her private surrender, Wolfe corrected. I exhaled. So what do we do with it? We do nothing. I blinked. Nothing? Miss Darrow has her answer, Wolfe said. And Leon Arroyo has made his final gesture. That is more closure than most crimes ever afford. Sure, but what if he shows up again? He won't. You sound certain. Wolfe opened his eyes. Because he has laid down the blade. It sounded final, and maybe it was. I placed the new knife in a second box, labeled and sealed it, and added it to the safe. We now had 2 knives that had never belonged in a kitchen, both preserved not as evidence, but as caution. The next morning, I called Claudia and told her we had the knife. She asked what we planned to do with it. I said it would be kept in trust. She didn't ask any further questions. Only said thank you and hung up. No reports were filed, no headlines printed, just another ghost in the silverware drawer, buried by discretion. That Friday, as if to restore cosmic balance, we received a new inquiry. This one from a woman. In Astoria, convinced her dog walker was switching out her imported saffron with turmeric. Wolfe declined before she finished the sentence. When I asked why, he replied without looking up, because some substitutions are not worth investigating. I took that to mean the week's blade count was final. At dinner, Fritz served sole. Meunière so delicate it could have been carved with a glance. Wolfe ate slowly, thoughtfully. I did the same, though in my case more from habit than reflection. When the meal ended, Wolfe poured himself a beer and gestured at the safe. 2 knives, no bodies, no arrests. I raised my glass. A perfect Wolfe case. He didn't smile. Not perfect, but complete. And with that he closed the matter, not with ceremony, not with triumph, but with the kind of quiet certainty that comes from having seen human frailty up close and choosing, just this once, to let it put down its weapon for good. And maybe that's the trick in all this. You don't solve a case by punishing every lie. Sometimes you solve it by knowing when to stop cutting, even if the knife is still sharp. 2 weeks later, the weather broke. Rain, soft but persistent, blurred the city's edges and gave the brownstone a sense of isolation that even Wolfe appreciated. His mood, previously fixed in that serene post-case torpor, had begun to shift back into its usual rhythms. Orchid consultations at 9, lunch at 1, no movement between 4 and 6 unless fire or Fritz required it. It was the kind of stillness that's earned, not stumbled into, and for once I wasn't eager to break it. But the city, of course, had other ideas. It began not with a phone call or a visitor, but with a letter, a real one, cream-colored envelope, no return address, postmarked from New Jersey. The handwriting on the front was neat and careful. Inside was a single folded sheet, typed, not handwritten. No greeting. No signature. You solved the wrong case. Leon didn't hide the knife. He didn't swap it. He didn't lie about when he was cut. He covered for someone else. Ask yourself who gained from silence and who lost more than a job. I read it 3 times, then walked into the office. Wolfe was reading a German-language monograph on some obscure varietal of Cattleya orchids. He didn't look up. "Wolfe," I said, "we've got a ghost." That got his attention. I handed him the letter. He took it without a word, read it once, then again. When he finished, he set it down and looked at me with that expression I've learned to interpret as deep displeasure tempered by curiosity. "You believe this is genuine?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. But whoever wrote it knows. Something. Enough to sound credible. He drummed his fingers on the armrest. If the claim is accurate, he said slowly, then we must reconsider Miss Beale's version of events. And Claudia's and Brett's. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Retrieve the transcripts from our meetings, all audio, all notes. Already pulled, I said, handing him the folder I'd prepped on instinct. He sighed. Mr. Goodwin, you are becoming dangerously efficient. It's a burden. We spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing every statement, every contradiction we'd smoothed over in the name of resolution. Wolfe had accepted Nadine's confession, her story about finding the third knife and holding on to it as leverage. But we'd never questioned where she'd first heard about the swapped blade, or who'd truly orchestrated its disappearance. And then, about halfway through my notes, something clicked. It was a tiny detail. A line from Brett, spoken almost as a throwaway during our office confrontation. You think I'd waste time with knives? I barely knew how to hold them right. And he hadn't. When he worked front of house, Brett rarely entered the kitchen. Staff had said as much. He bragged often, drank more and kept his hands clean, both literally and figuratively. The more I thought about it, the more one question loomed large. If Brett hadn't swapped the knife, who had? Wolfe put it together before I could say it. Aloud, Miss Foreman, he said. Rhea? She was the last to leave the restaurant before the change in staff. She handled logistics, inventory. She resented her exclusion, though she claimed otherwise. And she still had access. Okay, I said, but why? She saw the fracture forming, Wolfe murmured. Knew Brett was unstable. Knew Claudia was slipping under pressure. Perhaps she intended to warn them. Or perhaps she intended to break them. It was speculation, but the kind that held shape. And it had one more thread, one we hadn't pulled hard enough. The utility knife that Rhea said had gone missing during her tenure. I picked up the phone and called her. Miss Foreman, I said when she answered. Care to take a walk down memory lane? We met the next morning in the conservatory of a botanical cafe she had helped design. The space smelled like citrus blossoms and eucalyptus. Rhea looked calm, composed, too composed. I suppose this isn't a social call, she said. No, I replied. You told me a knife disappeared months before the incident with Leon. A paring knife. She nodded. That's right. Was it ever found? She hesitated. Not officially. Unofficially. Rhea looked at me, her expression flat. I found it, she said at last. Weeks later, in a waste bin behind the alley, wrapped in plastic. No blood. But it was one of ours. Why didn't you tell Claudia? I didn't trust her anymore, she said. She was losing control, making bad hires, letting Mars run her ragged. I thought, if I could show her that someone was sabotaging the place, maybe she'd listen. So you planted the idea. No, she said quietly. I planted the knife. She leaned back. I took one of the replacement blades Dale Corbin had sent. By accident, during our original order, I'd kept it. Figured we might need a spare. After I found the paring knife, I started watching Leon. He was volatile, angry. I thought he might snap. And when the fight happened, I didn't plan that. But when I heard Leon had been injured, I knew the timing was perfect. I snuck in that night, swapped the knives, hid the real one. I thought it would force Claudia to confront how dangerous the staff had become. I didn't expect her to call you. So you manipulated a crime scene. I shaped a narrative, she said. One that was already true, even if the details weren't. I let that hang in the air. I suppose you'll tell Wolfe, she said. Of course. Will he go to the police? Probably not. But he'll remember. She nodded. So will I. Back at the brownstone, I gave Wolfe the full report. He didn't look surprised. She believed she was restoring order, he said, by introducing chaos. Worse, I said. She thought she was the only adult in the room. That, Wolfe said, is the most dangerous delusion of all. He sat back, folded his hands and closed his eyes. "Will you confront her again?" I asked. "No. She has confessed. That is sufficient. Should we tell Claudia?" "No, Miss Darrow has reclaimed her authority. To inject doubt now would serve no one." I nodded slowly. "So that's the end." "It is," Wolfe said. "This time it truly is." The knife, it turned out, had sliced more than fear or flesh. It had sliced through truth, ambition, guilt, and the illusion of stability. Everyone involved had made a cut, small, deliberate, and defining, and now the blade was sheathed for good. Wolfe reached for his beer, raised it slightly toward me. "To order," he said. I clinked my glass against his. "To knowing where every knife belongs." And we drank, while outside the city breathed in the rain. Clean. Still. For now. It was the third Wednesday since Claudia Darrow walked into the brownstone and dropped a metaphorical knife into our lap, and with it a case that never quite bled, but always managed to cut. The office was quiet. The rain had passed. Wolfe was back to his orchids, and I was back to pretending I enjoyed cataloguing receipts. On the surface, everything had settled. The storm was over, but if you looked close enough, you could still see the places it had cracked the foundation. I asked Wolfe that afternoon, after Fritz had cleared the plates, if he felt satisfied. "Not with people," he said, "but with the pattern." That was his way of saying the puzzle had been solved, even if the pieces were a little grimy, because the truth wasn't in the crime, it was in the margins. It was Rhea Foreman, disillusioned and too clever by half, planting a blade not to hurt, but to shake. It was Nadine Beale, caught between silence and survival, hoarding a knife like a secret no one else would keep. It was Leon Arroyo, bleeding from more than his hand, trying to save face in a world where control was currency. And Brett Naylor. Well, he was the match someone struck just to see if the house would burn. But the real story, the one Wolfe chased from his chair and I chased through kitchens and alleyways, was how ambition turns to fear, how silence masquerades as virtue, and how a simple switch of a knife set off a chain that didn't end with violence but with realization. Wolfe didn't call the police. He didn't write letters or seek credit. He preserved the evidence, made the necessary calls, and let Claudia Darrow do what she did best: rebuild. Whether she deserved to or would get it right this time wasn't our concern. Wolfe had once said justice was a plate best served when the diner is hungry enough to eat it, and in this case every party had swallowed their share. That night, over beer and aged cheddar, I asked him the question I'd been thinking about since Rhea confessed. "You ever think we should have told Claudia the whole truth?" He finished chewing, then took a sip of beer. "No," he said. "She did not seek truth, she sought clarity." "Same thing, isn't it?" He shook his head. "Truth is infinite and indifferent. Clarity is what you need to proceed." I thought about that for a long minute, then wrote it down. Case closed, file marked, knives counted. If anyone ever came looking for the truth, they'd find it, boxed, catalogued, and filed behind the beer tap and the basil plants. Not hidden, just waiting, and if they didn't, well, that was their problem.